Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Before we begin, I should warn you that some of you may find what you are about to hear rather disturbing.
Too many people have reported seeing too many things, whether it's at Roswell.
In 1990, the devil or somebody pulled that spirit man out of my body, and I was a slave under Satan and the devil for a few years there.
I'm George Noory, and I'm the host of Coast to Coast AM Radio, which is a nationally syndicated radio show.
If you're like me, you're generally aware of George Noory. He hosts the Coast to Coast radio show on the overnights here in St. Louis. It's on 97.1 FM. He is someone who traffics in aliens, ghosts, the demonic, conspiracies, all sorts of stuff. But did you also know before he did that, he was the boss in the building I'm in right now, News Channel 5. He was not only the news director here at KSDK, he hired some of the biggest names in St. Louis TV history, talking about Karen Foss, Jennifer Blome, Art Holliday. So how did a guy who worked in news and spotted big-time talent here at KSDK go on to become an overnight radio host talking about aliens and black helicopters and all that stuff? We're going to get into it in this edition of the McGonigle Chronicles. He talks about the Lemp Mansion, how he hired all the people I just mentioned, and so much more. It's a lot of fun. So here it is. George Noory, one-time news director, hired some of the greats. Didn't hire me. I was hired by Mike Shipley, and I don't know if the great Mike Shipley believes in aliens or not. Maybe that's another podcast. Away we go. You hired Karen Foss.
I did.
You hired Jennifer Blome.
I did. Art Holliday.
Art Holliday. What do you know, without getting into a long jag here, like, what are your recollections of, I mean, those are icons here in St. Louis. What are your memories of, or why'd you hire Karen Foss?
Great person. She had what I called 5-second star quality, and that is, as a good news director, if somebody has that impact on you within 5 seconds, you know that that person is generally going to be a success. That's the way I always hired the talent for the programs that I produced or were responsible for. And when I saw Karen on tape, I said, that's the person who's going to mix. And we did auditions here in St. Louis back in '79 with a number of people who we were looking at to select, and she just was far beyond any of them. And there were even some locals at the station who wanted that job as the anchor person. But once I had Karen on and we did a little audition with her, I told the management, I said, that's who I want as my anchor person. And they said, okay, we'll get her. And so we went out to dinner that night. They cut the contract deal with her, and then the rest was history.
Wow. And I know you get this question all the time, but so just oblige me, George. So how do you go from the guy who hired Karen Foss to the guy people hear on the radio talking about ancient civilizations and UFOs and all the stuff that, you know, some might consider a little out there? It's like, how does a hard news boss go into that realm?
I recreated myself back in 1996 after watching a movie called Talk Radio starring Eric Bogosian. He was a talk show host who sadly was killed. A real story. A guy's name was Alan Berg. He was a Denver talk show host, and he got killed by some neo-Nazis. Well, I wanted to be a talk show host. I didn't want to end up like he did.
I was going to say, you kind of picked a funny role model, but you know, not making light of it.
But I wanted to do that. That's a facet of my career I had not done. I had been a radio reporter. I'd been a television executive producer. I'd been a news director, but I had never been a talk show host. And so I recreated who I was. You know, I'm a media guy. I've been a media guy since I was 19 years old, starting in Detroit, Michigan. And so that's really all I did and all I do. And so it was easy for me to create this persona and do this talk show. And in St. Louis specifically, I started off as the Nighthawk. I created that image of this guy on at night doing what he did, and we started soaring in the ratings. And then I got syndicated, picked up by the network to do Coast to Coast, and the rest is history.
Yeah, and I read an article, I think, in STL magazine where when you were starting that act, somebody at KMOX said, quit with the ghosts and the UFOs. There's no audience for that.
There's no audience or future for you in that field. Tom Langmeyer, who's now in Milwaukee, regularly will say that at speaking engagements that the two of us might attend. And he said, my biggest mistake was telling George Noory there's no future for him in the paranormal. And everybody just cracks up.
That is too funny. So how about this? Where I imagine a lot of St. Louis people will hopefully listen to this. Are there any St. Louis ghost stories, conspiracies, or little tales of the unexplained that that you are interested in, or that have always kind of been on your mind?
Probably one of the best is at the Lemp Mansion. There have been several suicides there by the family, and people who visit the Lemp, which is open for tours, and especially during Halloween, people who visit the Lemp Mansion say there's some very strange and weird things going on. I hear a story every once in a while, the people who go there for their dinner, little events at the Lemp, and strange things happen. There was one guy having dinner with his group, and he was making fun of the place, making fun of the ghosts, and, this doesn't exist, nothing like that. And he had his hands, on his lap underneath the dinner table. He pulls his hands up after he had been knocking the ghosts, and they're full of butter, just like somebody buttered him up like a piece of toast. And there wasn't any butter underneath the desk or table or anything like that. It just appeared, and it was almost like these ghosts are saying, keep it up.
Wow.
Keep it up. He was a believer after that.
Wow.
So lots of strange things happen.
And I also, I know there's the legend, and I want to be delicate here because I know there are descendants, and to them it's not entertainment, but there was some legend of like a monkey boy at the Lemp Mansion, or some. I think I've got this right. And in the actual history, I believe there was way back a child with some. I don't know if it was Down syndrome or something. So there was like some kernel of truth.
Yeah.
Am I in the ballpark here?
Little pieces. There was a family member there who had an affliction, and I believe that person died, and that person continued to haunt the mansion. They didn't want to leave. The ghostly realm is real. I had my doubts a long time ago that it might not exist, but it does. Too many people have witnessed too many strange things. And I think what it is it's merely energy. We as living beings have a soul, and that soul is part of our existence. But when the physical body dies, whatever term of length you live, it's got to go somewhere. Something happens to it because it exists forever. And that's what happens. It goes off into another plane, another dimension. Whatever it might be, whether you want to call this heaven, hell, who knows, but it's real. It's out there.
And I know you were raised Roman Catholic, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Do you still?
No, I'm not a practicing Catholic. I believe in a higher power. I believe in a God. I don't know exactly what it is. I don't think there's somebody up in a cloud with harps all around him. But there's something very unusual about all of this that has put it all together. Elon Musk, the founder of Tesla Motors, is a person that I admire, and he thinks that we are living in an artificial intelligence world that was created by somebody, something, and that's what we are, that we're not really what we think we are. We are a creation of some kind of computer software, which is even stranger.
Whoa. Yeah.
I just hope the programming keeps running.
Yeah, that's right. And circling back to St. Louis lore, I've always, for good or for bad, been obsessed and fascinated with The Exorcist and the real case that it's based on that happened here in St. Louis. I went to St. Louis U, and some Jesuits were involved with that case, and they did a big special here. I don't want to name him, but a very devout Catholic former colleague would get very upset every year around Halloween or when they're doing a TV special there. He would beg me. He would say, "Pat, don't mess with that stuff. You don't know what you're opening yourself up to. There is a realm. Don't poke the bear." And this is a guy with many advanced degrees. He's not, and I know you are too. And that's the part about the whole Exorcist thing that always freaked me out the most, was when these Jesuits with 16 PhDs who studied at Georgetown and all these other places, like, they would say to me, "Don't mess with a Ouija board." And I get chills now saying it
Well,
because
it's great advice.
But-
Don't mess with a Ouija board.
But it's one thing if like a tarot card reader is saying that to you, but when a guy with a Roman collar with all these degrees is telling you not to play with something that's made by Parker Brothers, I mean, that freaks me out. I mean, do you agree? Does that give you the willies?
Well, what it does is it adds credence to what we all think the Ouija board does, and that is it's a portal. It allows somebody, some entity, to come through. I'll tell you an interesting story. Years ago, when I was doing my Nighthawk show, I did a show on Ouija boards, and I had a Ouija board in the studio. Everything went wrong technically. In a studio that nothing ever went wrong. The computers didn't work, the commercials didn't run, the board lights were screwed up. It was unbelievable. I told my producer, Howard Morton at the time, I said, Howard, get this thing out of here. Just take it out. And he did. And as he's walking down the hallway, he gives it to one of our news guys. And the guy wanted it. So he took it home. And his life changed forever. He got fired.
Oh, my God.
His relationship collapsed. Everything went wrong with him. And we met him about a year later. And I said, hey, Daryl, how you doing? He went, not well. He said, for some reason, ever since I took that Ouija board from you guys, my life has gone downhill. And so we told him, you burn it. Get rid of it. And he did. And 6 months later, we ran into him again. And he had a new job and a better relationship. And his life had changed. It was really strange.
Wow.
There's something about that board. It's a game, no doubt about that. But there's something about that board that creates and pulls in entities that you don't want to be associated with.
I know. And doesn't it give you the spooks like every time, whether it's The Conjuring or the sequel that's out now, when you hear about some paranormal investigation, by the time you get to page 9 or 10, there's always a doggone Ouija board in the mix, it seems to me.
They're always there.
It's uncanny to me.
Experts will tell you, stay away from the Ouija boards. I have only one guest who loves the Ouija board and swears by it and says there's nothing wrong with it. But everyone else says don't do it. Years ago on Coast to Coast, I was going to have a Ouija board special and do a live Ouija board exercise on the air with 3 experts. One told me never to do it. The other was right in the middle, and the other one said, let's do it. I made the decision right during airtime, as we're talking about the Ouija board, it's already there, it's set up, to cancel that portion of the show, to not do the Ouija board special. And I got to tell you, Pat, I had hundreds of emails from people who said, that was a good decision, that was the right thing to do. And then I got a handful of people who were having pizza parties, waiting for ghosts to come through. They had their own Ouija board, and they were really ticked off that I canceled that portion of the show. Sadly, a lot of those people who went through and did their own little Ouija board thing had the strangest, worst luck ever. And so again, my bottom line is the spirit realm is real. It happens. Stay away from it.
Yeah, and ultimately I took the advice of my colleague I mentioned, when I said, come on, man, I'm a Catholic and all that. I mean, what's the harm in being interested in this stuff? And he basically said that if you do believe in Jesus Christ and you're a practicing Catholic, that it's disrespectful to fixate on this part of the spectrum, and that makes perfect sense. So if you do believe that Jesus rose from the dead and all of that, then think more about that and not about his arch enemies. And I think that's good advice. Take it or leave it. This is not necessarily the blah blah blah. But that's just where I'm coming from. But the other thing I know you talk about that when we talk about Ouija boards and stuff we just can't understand. This is a podcast, but we're sitting in a radio station. As I understand it, Marconi, or maybe a couple of other guys, like they only even knew that there were radio waves flying around us like 150 years ago, more or less. And when you look at that in the scope of the amount of time humans have been on this earth, like that's yesterday.
Right.
So, I mean, if we just figured out that we can send video and audio through the ether in your head, who's to say what else we're not seeing? I mean, what do you make of that?
Well, I mean, there are trees in the woods, and you don't see them, but they're there. Radio broadcasts, if you don't have a radio, you're not going to receive it. If you don't have that ability to receive a signal, you don't know it exists. And it's the same with the ghostly realm. It is out there. It is real. We just don't have all the capabilities of spotting them or seeing them. But they're there, and it's all energy as far as I'm concerned. And people are working on creating devices to be able to communicate with the dead. Edison staunchly wanted to create one, and there's another device called the Spirit-Com, or another one called Frank's Box, created by a guy named Frank, who is dead. Maybe he's calling through now. You never know.
Right.
It's energy, and if you can tap into that, you're going to be able to communicate. So maybe 100 years from now, dealing with the other side, other than through seances and psychics and mediums, will be very easy.
Yeah, and the great thing about you personally, if you don't mind my saying so, George, very popular syndicated nationally radio show, Coast to Coast AM, but so you're a legendary broadcaster, but you're a magnificent listener, and I'm just wondering if there are times, it's been a long week, and you get a caller who's talking about flames that were talking to him and keeping him from going into a pharmacy or something, and you're just tempted to say, take a hike. Come on.
Never, Pat. Every caller has their place on the program. As far-fetched as a story might seem, the good callers stay on longer. The bad callers, sometimes we get people on who really can't talk well. We're not going to put them down at all, but they're not going to be on for 3 or 4 minutes. Stumbling along. So, but everybody gets their due on Coast to Coast, and the good stories are captivating, and those are the ones that are engaging, and we'll talk with those people for quite a long time. The other people come on and come off pretty quickly.
And this gets to what we were talking about earlier, just the intimacy of radio. You've worked in TV and radio.
Sure.
I've done a little radio, more TV. And it's amazing. I mean, you would think I can't see you, but I hear you in my car. But why is the connection stronger to a person you spend time with in the car or on your earbuds at work than the guy you see on the TV at the dentist's office?
Well, what radio does is it allows you, the listener, to create in your own mind what's happening, who that person is who's talking to you. And there's this amazing one-on-one connection. You know, I broadcast on 615 terrestrial stations in North America, millions of listeners every night, yet I broadcast to one person. Not millions, just one. And that one person believes in that relationship. Sometimes it's had its downside. I mean, I've gotten emails from women who hear my bumper music and they think I'm playing it for them.
Yeah.
And they fall in love. And, you know, I don't want to hurt their feelings, so I just ignore the emails.
Yeah.
But that's the intimacy of radio, where it is so one-on-one, they actually feel that they are connected to you. And in many cases, they are. Sometimes it goes too far. But by and large, radio is extremely intimate.
Yeah.
A lot of people listen in bed. A lot of people are listening in their cars at night where they're the only person. You and the radio and that person. That's it.
Yeah. Well,
so that's what it is.
Well, and then let me ask you this, George, and if you don't want to reveal anything too personal, just say, you know, I'm not going there. We can change topics. But you mentioned talk radio, sort of inspiring you to go into radio. Amazing movie. If you haven't seen it, Eric Bogosian, check it out. Alan Bird was the real guy so he had like sort of a political talk show. Anyway,
yeah,
and
he was a little more dramatic.
Sure, but this
and hate.
And hardcore listener, and I know that's not your act, but this in the movie and in real life, this person with diametrically opposed views and probably some mental illness mixed in was so worked up by it, he killed him. So I know you don't do like the barking, you know, left versus right radio type stuff, but you are talking about life and death and the spirit realm and stuff that cuts to the quick. You touched on this woman. I mean, do you ever worry? I mean, again, Eric. That things could get out of hand.
I don't worry about that. You know, you do get concerned about stalkers. I've had that happen, where somebody would find out where you live and they visit you, or they take pictures of themselves in front of your house and mail you the picture. So I've had things like that happen. I mean, that's part and parcel of the job in the industry and stuff like that. We've had speaking engagements where a number of people are there, and you're always aware of, the possibility of something that could go awry. There was a guest of ours named Rupert Sheldrake who was at an event one day, very controversial guy talking about things, and a fellow who was of Japanese heritage approached him, pulled out a knife and stabbed him in the thigh and missed his femoral artery by inches. He would have bled to death. So we're always aware of things, that there are people out there who are very strange or who have some severe mental issues.
Yeah, well, I mean,
they're there.
It strikes me how
we see that in everyday life.
Right. I mean, a couple years ago, I said, "Hey, I'm going to be signing. I'm going to be helping out with this thing at the mall," and a guy who was not well showed up and didn't. He was sweating and shaking and had all these, and it scared the crap out of me. I don't mind telling you. You seem so nonchalant. You're going to be at Lindenwood University here. It's going to be a huge crowd there, and you're determined, actually, to have a one-on-one with every single person there.
Absolutely.
Some people would say, geez, didn't you see what just happened in Orlando? I mean, are you bananas? How are you so trusting in your fellow man?
I just am, and I happen to think that everybody's approachable and reachable, and that's my persona, and it seems to have worked.
Right. All right. So we want to wrap up here. You've been very generous with your time. Any other final takes on St. Louis? I know St. Louisans are interested in.
Love St. Louis. Disappointing that the Rams are leaving for Los Angeles. Of course, I spend a lot of time in L.A. as well.
So you split time in St. Louis and L.A. So you're one of the rare human beings.
L.A. left. The Rams left L.A., came to St. Louis. Now they're going back. St. Louis deserves a professional football team. It's a great sports town. It's a great city. And it's very hot in the summer.
It is. And how about the media landscape?
It's great media.
Yeah.
It's great media.
Do you look at it and think, hey, what's going on here? I don't know any of these people anymore.
No, but the media is changing. The social networking world has changed the media. And in order to survive, you need to adapt and make it happen. Yeah. And it's happening.
Yeah, and are you a fan of this business? We're making a podcast here.
I podcast myself.
Right.
We stream to thousands of people every night.
Yeah, and I know you're tired. You've been up all night, but I mean that's what I love about podcasts. Listening and now trying one on my own. I've worked in TV news for many years. 11-second soundbite. 15 if it's awesome. Story count has
different.
To be.
You can get into
yes.
some detail about things and talk and have a great conversation without having to worry about a quick 5-second snippet.
Yeah. Last question. Anything at all you remember about Jennifer Blome? She speaks glowingly of you. It's okay if nothing comes to mind immediately. But
I initially brought her in as my environmental reporter a long time ago to do weather and environmental work. And Dave Murray was doing our weather at the time. And, Jennifer was our environmental reporter handling these issues. I had specialists all over the place at the time. And then we moved her into anchoring and things like that, and she just took off like a rocket. She's a great news person.
Yeah, she showed me. She has a clip from her, I think, Bowling Green or Dayton, like her first job. She
might have been in Toledo?
Toledo, that's what it is, yeah. I knew it was in Ohio, but it was like she was literally, no offense, like a weather girl. Like she was fresh out of college. And Randy Price, who I came to know in Boston years later, was the anchor. But yeah, she, it's an amazing thing. But I don't want to keep you, George Noory. George, this is my very first podcast I've ever recorded for myself.
Good for you. You did well.
You think there'll be more?
I would hire you.
All right, we'll end there. Thanks so much. All right, there you go. That is George Noory shooting from the hip, telling you like it is. Hope you enjoyed this edition of the McGonigle Chronicles. And if you haven't checked out some of the other podcasts, have some cool ones on there. One about a guy who died twice and came back and describes his experiences. And another one with a lovely woman named Judy Tippett. She was a St. Louis Playboy bunny at the St. Louis Playboy Club back in the 60s. It's a really cool story. It's a 10-minute podcast, kind of short. Easy listening. She's amazing. This podcast is over. Good night and good luck.